Hey everybody. I read something yesterday which made an impression on me, and what I'm referencing is something from Duncan Sabine, a person that I have no prior association with or no mental associations with. I'm not talking about social associations. Um, and this is something that he shared with the Less Wrong community, which is a community that I monitor but don't interact with directly. Like nobody, maybe one person involved in Less Wrong knows who I am. So this is a piece that just showed up in my email inbox. It's called Sapir-Whorf for Rationalists. And I'm not even going to talk about the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis at all in this. And what I'm going to give you here is not even attempting a complete summary of this essay by Duncan Sabine. I'm just going to share a few pieces that stuck with me, which I think you'll see the resonance of this in just a second. So we live in a time of rapidly proliferating vocabulary. You know, people come up with new words to describe new concepts, to recognize distinctions which they think are going unnoticed and unappreciated by the vast majority of people, largely given the fact that our language doesn't really pinpoint those distinctions. So there will be examples that I'm giving here that might piss you off. These are not Duncan's examples. These are mine because these are the things that make sense to me that I can produce without notes. So some of the things that I remember from this essay. People get irritated when others try to push new vocabulary on them that they don't really want to, adopt and use. Why is that? Well, some people, when they react defensively against somebody else's attempt to push new vocabulary on them or to force them to alter their language to accommodate, new distinctions, new ideas, largely about social justice. I mean, that's a very easy one to pinpoint right now because there are a lot of people who are pushing back against the changes in language that the social justice advocates, if I change warrior to advocate, does that make it any less offensive? Social justice advocates want us to speak differently. And why do they want us to speak differently? Well, they might say it's out of fairness or justice or accountability or something like that. But, we all know that they're really looking to indoctrinate us to make us think the way they think by using language the way they use language. Some people push back against this. And again, the social justice stuff is just my example. This is not the thrust of Duncan's argument at all. But when people push back against this idea, sometimes they come up with the idea, look, enough new concepts. I have enough concepts to make sense of the world. My grandfather got along just fine in the world without any of your esoteric new words. He didn't need them. I don't need them. And Duncan is actually pushing back against this idea that we have enough distinctions already. Our vocabulary is adequate to make sense of the world. We don't need to expand it any further. He says, no, that's wrong. And we're not anywhere close to to using the number of distinctions or recognizing the number of distinctions that are possible given our cognitive limitations. We can learn a lot more, we can notice a lot more, we can make a lot more distinctions about the world than we do now. Some of them are worth making. And I agree with that. For some people, given their interests, given their associations, given the subcultures in which they operate, noticing new, largely unnoticed distinctions in the world, proposing and then adopting and using new vocabulary to recognize those distinctions comes easily. For other people, it's difficult. And, along with being difficult, it's annoying when somebody insists that you do it. Why is it difficult? Well, because the distinctions being recognized by the new vocabulary are not important to you. You don't care about them. If it's important to you, if you care about it, if it makes sense to you, if it's something that you've noticed in the world but you didn't quite have the vocabulary to put your finger on it, and to describe it succinctly, and somebody offers you a phrase that just falls into place, it makes sense. It's like, yeah, I recognize that as a real distinction in the world. I didn't have this piece of vocabulary before, and now I do. I'm going to use it. That is utterly effortless. You don't have to study, you don't have to sit down and write down a list, you don't have to try to memorize new vocabulary. It just sticks because you have a use for it. So the example that comes to mind for me is virtue signaling. This is an old phrase now, but I think I encountered it before a lot of the people who listen to my podcast did, because when I first started using the phrase, I started getting email from people saying, You know, it totally works. I totally recognize what you're talking about. This is something I've seen in the world, but I didn't have vocabulary to identify it. And the phrase virtue signaling provides me with that. They didn't have to write it down, you know, they didn't have to make any effort to memorize it. It just clicked into place because given their experience of the world, it named a behavior that they saw taking place that they didn't have vocabulary for before. So when we encounter vocabulary, you know, lexical items, new words, new phrases, or new uses for old words that have sort of fallen out of favor, because English has a whole lot of words, most of them we don't use. We could certainly repurpose some, you know, some of the ones sitting, rusting out in the yard. So we are all absolutely capable of expanding our vocabulary and thereby expanding the subtlety with which we can see and communicate about the world with one another. There are subcultures. We don't expect lawyers and soldiers and career criminals and scientists and, you know, technologists and management gurus to all have the exact same vocabulary. Because they deal with, you know, specialized interests, they are going to have specialized vocabulary which will not be accessible to, you know, the public at large. But from time to time, subcultures, they infiltrate positions of power, say, for example, universities, tech company, HR departments, government, and a subculture becomes overrepresented in positions of power, and then that subculture is faced with the temptation. Do we use the mechanisms of state violence or economic power to force people to, you know, to speak as if they cared about things they don't really care about? And, you know, more often than not, or too often anyway, the answer is, yeah, let's go ahead and use that power to force people to talk like we do. And the thought behind that is, if we force them to use our vocabulary, eventually they will begin to think in our vocabulary and they will think more like we do. Here is a short chart of expanded alternative personal pronouns that respect somebody's gender identity. He, she, been using my whole life, no problem with that. They, seems clunky, but, you know, it's gender neutral, fine. I'll go with that. But, you know, per, z, somebody recognizes these alternative gender pronouns as making a distinction which is worth recognizing and encoding in language. I disagree. I don't see any reason why I should have to memorize, you know, these additional lexical items, these additional new words. They don't mean anything to me. The distinctions that they represent are not important to me. I don't see any reason why I should have to memorize, understand, and use these new terms, and I'm not going to. But if I decided that I was going to, just, you know, for whatever reason, you know, maybe somebody had found some leverage over me that they could, you know, they could extort me into, you know, making an effort to learn these, I would have to sit down, write them out, and maybe come up with some sort of mnemonic device to remember what it is they say, because they don't mark any distinctions. They don't represent any distinctions in the world that I think of as being important and worthy of my attention, time, or, you know, psychic energy. So it would be work for me to try to memorize and then spontaneously implement the use of these new lexical items. So, you know, I don't and I won't. You know, again, the examples I'm giving are around the social justice, you know, conservative mindset, cultural battle. And that's, I don't remember if he mentioned anything about it, but it's certainly not the emphasis of Duncan's essay. This is just the stuff that I remember and, you know, how the applications I saw of it, you know. I saw, oh yeah, this fits this other thing that I've been talking about and which I'm concerned with. So that helps me remember the points that he's made in his essay. Again, I'm not going to talk about the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis because, okay. And Duncan, in his essay, invokes George Orwell, you know, and Newspeak, that distinctions which are not captured in language won't persist in the minds of the people. You know, if we don't have a word for something, then we can't really maintain conscious awareness of that thing, which was the purpose of the ongoing project of Newspeak, which was to continually contract the vocabulary that people had available to them to express ideas. And some of the people working on this, at one point, at least in the movie with John Hurt, this scene stays in my memory. One of the people working on Newspeak said that a generation from now, it will be impossible to have the conversation that we're having right now. People just won't have the concepts for it. And this is, again, how I'm remembering and understanding this essay. We live in a time of rapid technological development, which is creating social and economic disruption. I won't say chaos, but certainly disruption, such that old strategies, old ways of viewing things, old approaches to problems don't work the way they used to, because the context in which we are implementing these tried and true solutions has changed. So we absolutely will need to have a continuously expanding repertoire of distinctions and ideas and labels for those distinctions and ideas, which is to say, new words, neologisms, new phrases, new terminology. We're going to have to continue to update our vocabulary if we are going to be able to make sense of the world and to have the sort of influence in it, that we want to have. I mean, we can stick with Grandpa's lexicon, but so much of what's going on around us won't make sense. Now, it doesn't matter how much effort you put into expanding your lexicon and expanding, the body of distinctions that you make in the world, you're still going to be lost. Things are changing so rapidly and on such a grand scale that we're all going to be lost a lot of the time. But some of us will be more lost than others. And, again, this comes from a community called Less Wrong. They don't think that they're right about everything, and their project isn't to be right about everything. It's just to be a little less, dumbfounded and confused, blinkered, and wrong than most people. So I guess that's the goal going forward, to be a little less clueless than the rest of the herd. Which, if for you an axiom is the smarter I am, the better, you don't need any more justification than that to try to be less wrong. But if you want to be happy, well, that's a completely different can of fish. And in fact, being consistently wrong about certain things, or being consistently oblivious to certain things happening around you, might actually lead to you being happier than you would if you were less wrong, less stupid, and less clueless about the world. All right. The bits of the essay that I wanted to summarize I should have been able to do that in about 3 minutes, but my wrist is buzzing because the pizza has been in the oven for 17 minutes, so I'm going to stop. And I will talk to you again later.